All right, thank you. So, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining the talk today. And the topic of today's talk is marshaling AI resources to explore the COVID-19 related scientific literatures. And as Richard mentioned, this is a joint effort between Thomson Reuters C3 team and the researchers from Vector Institute. So from C3, we have Cowling, Senior Research Engineer, Feng, myself, and Dan Sephr, both research scientists, joining this project, and each of us will present the details of our work in this talk. So the agenda of this talk will include an overview introduction of the global community response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the challenges the biomedical community is facing nowadays, and then we're going to introduce our response and the challenges we're facing in terms of using AI resources to help the biomedical researchers. And then Conrad is going to talk about the engagement model he has built during the past few weeks. Dan is going to talk about how do we utilize active learning to obtain gold datasets. And then I'm going to talk about the framework and the models we have experimented on the public available biomedical dataset. So as you all know, the COVID-19 global pandemic urges biomedical researchers to understand more about the virus and work endlessly to find solutions to stop the spreading. And up to today, there are already around 138,000 corona-related research literatures available. And the number of new related publications grows rapidly every day. And this fast development of publications urges a new culture of research. And because the enormous amount of articles are available, it is very hard for biomedical researchers to read them all and navigate information to answer their scientific questions. So having artificial intelligence experts to develop text and data mining tools that can help the biomedical community develop answers to their high priority scientific questions is in demand. So Conrad, Dan, and myself from C3 team also want to participate and contribute to the efforts, and hopefully what we build can help the medical community. So with the real-world challenges understood, we hope to help the biomedical researchers to explore and mine information from the articles more efficiently by building better question answering capabilities and packaging them into useful applications. But one immediate challenge for us to apply the state-of-the-art natural language processing methods is there is no annotated dataset. So to address that, we collaborated with the subject matter experts from University of Toronto to create a question answering dataset from the COVID-19 dataset. So speaking of the COVID-19 dataset, it is a source of over 138,000 scholarly articles, including over 69,000 with full text about COVID-19, SARS, and the related coronavirus, prepared by the White House and a coalition of leading research groups. And this data set is released along with a Kaggle competition in which the goal is also to develop text mining tools to help biomedical researchers to navigate information. And we also participated in this challenge by creating a question answering framework using a combination of unsupervised machine learning methods, since we don't have any labeled data set to work with. So we used clustering, topic modeling, citation retrieval, and we utilized the Elasticsearch as the backbone search engine in the framework. So there was a talk about the details of this framework. If you're interested in the details, Jack or Richard can share the recording link somewhere, and feel free to watch it. So back to the topic of creating the question and the answering dataset from the COVID-19 dataset, we have prepared a few batches of those QA pairs generated in different ways in Excel sheet, and we share those batches of question answering dataset with SMEs to get their feedback. So this whole process is an iterative process, and during the process, we learned more about how a biomedical researcher works to answer a scientific question. The first approach we implemented is we first obtained 10 questions from the Kaggle competition under task 4. So task 4 is the one we selected to submit our submission. So I can quickly show you what is under this task 4. So the task here under this cargo competition, we can also call it topic. That is, what do we know about the vaccines and the therapeutics? And under this task, as you can see, there are a list of questions or a list of the things the bio researchers want to find the answer, such as the methods evaluating potential complications of antibody and so on. So we take those 10 questions under task 4, and for each of the questions, we retrieve top 10 answers from our question answering framework I showed in the previous slide. And in the end, we obtain 100 pairs in total. And here is the example of the data set. So in column A, we have a list of answers for a question. And column B, we want to have SMEs to grade the answer with the schema ACDF. Conrad is going to talk more about the details of this schema later on. But the feedback we get using this approach is it's very hard for SMEs to make a decision because to make a decision, they need to spend hours reading literatures to find the answer. So to address that feedback, we take a second approach. So the second approach is we don't want to limit ourselves just for the questions under task 4, but we go to find all the articles with the title that contain the do, does, or is, are, and the WH questions. So the titles of the articles are already in the question format. And then we provide the abstract of those corresponding articles to give SME some context, some background information of this question. And we use the conclusion from the abstract section as the answer for the question. And because not all the articles has the structured abstract, which means some of the articles don't have conclusion from the abstract. For those articles, we use SBIRT, which is sentence BERT, to calculate the sentence similarity between the title, between the question and the text snippet from the article, and use the text snippet from the article that has highest cosine similarity as the conclusion. So here is an example from our second approach. Column B has the list of questions, and those questions are the titles themselves. And column C, we extract the abstract from the corresponding article. And the column D, we have the conclusions. They are either from the abstract section or they are generated from the sentence BERT. And the feedback we got from this batch is this is doable, but it requires SMEs with very specific domain knowledge, because when they read the abstract in column C, they find out a lot of terminologies in this article it requires very specific subdomain knowledge. So they suggest us to first to identify the subdomains of each of the article, and then we can send those batches of QS to SMEs with corresponding subdomain knowledge to annotate the data set. So in this way, we can have the best match of the domains of the article and the knowledge of the SMEs. So to do that, we are doing the extreme multi-label classification and the topic modeling to get all the subdomains, so the subdomains can be clinic, medicine, microbiology, and so on. And to make this whole process more user-friendly, Conrad developed a web application which incorporates the engagement model and SME user experience. So now I'll hand it over to Conrad to talk more about the details of the work. So Conrad, I'll hand it over to you.
Sure, thanks Luna. Give me one moment here. Okay, so as Luna just explained, we have this quickly growing body of research, and that research is being released to the public faster than ever. And then we have a community of researchers and engineers competing to produce useful technology with all the available publications coming out of that research. And the collaboration we're presenting today is particular to Thomson Reuters and Vector Institute and our partners all working together. You see many of them listed here, and I'm also including all the organizations that are involved with producing the data set through the Cowling competition. And the points I want to make is just taking a moment to appreciate what a coordination challenge this is. We're trying to move very quickly. Everything is ultimately experimental. We're introducing machine learning components, which can be difficult to understand, difficult to compare. And we have these many people with different areas of expertise across different organizations, many of them who've never worked together, and we're all trying to push in the same direction. So we have teams working in parallel on different tasks, and there's a large potential for both unintentionally redundant work and or incompatible work. So what we really need is some sort of approach to try to enable everyone to leverage their particular areas of expertise, while at the same time rapidly building upon one another's work altogether. So how do we do this? And that's where this engagement model comes in. So many of the machine learning enabled consumer apps we use every day are very good at using reinforcing feedback loops. And we attempt to adopt a similar approach for this work. So with those consumer apps, they will put out an initial product that begins to offer some sort of value to its users. The users then, by interacting with that application, provide training data back to the research and engineering teams, who are then able to iterate and improve the product in this reinforcing manner. And so we're attempting to do the same thing, where researchers and engineers from Thomson Reuters and Fech Institute are putting together the experiments we're reporting on today, as well as many others. And we're trying to engage a variety of domain experts across our partners, including many universities, layer 6. And we're hoping that we can provide a user experience for them that's going to produce this labeled data that we don't have now, which is going to enrich the original content and tasks we get from the Kaggle competition and the broader community. And in the end, this is going to result in us, in our collaboration, to be able to converge on useful technology faster and in a more focused manner. So the way this works more specifically is that we need to be able to systematically probe the search space. If we're trying to create what's ultimately some sort of information retrieval technology or question answering technology, we need to understand how the machine learning components we're developing are doing, and we also need to know where to invest the development of that machine learning technology. So there are these topics that Luna introduced already. There are essentially 10 to 15 topic areas that the Kaggle competition is structured around. And what this little branch type icon means in sort of data modeling terminology is a one-to-many relationship. So you can sort of think of this as from each topic, it branches out into various questions that are related to that topic. Each of those questions then has potential answers that are found within the publications. And then we want experts to be able to provide us feedback or labels about the quality of those question answer pairs related to each topic. So going through a quick example, Donna and Luna are working on task 4. So vaccines are topic 4, vaccines and therapeutics. You can imagine a simple question in this topic being, when will a COVID-19 vaccine be available? You can imagine an answer being pulled from the text where it's talking about similar vaccines and their development cycle. And then we're going to provide that to various experts who are going to be able to give us some feedback on whether this is an appropriate answer or not. And more specifically, we are trying to capture this data in squad format. So what that means is there's a squad is the Stanford question answering dataset. It's a very well-known reading comprehension dataset. It's been a public challenge that's been out in the open for some time. There's been some really incredible, there's an incredible body of research that's related to solving this problem and using data in this format. And so we're going to aim for this being our target label format, and we're going to augment it a little bit with the grades and some credibility rankings that Luna had mentioned earlier. So let's take a look at a squad example so we can a little bit more concretely understand what it is we're going for. So here's an example from squad on the Black Death. And it's what I want you to understand here is that each of the annotations is essentially composed of 3 parts. So there's what's called the context, which is essentially a body of text that's related to the topic. There's a question that's related to the context. And then there's 2 different kinds of answers. There's the ground truth answers that have been marked up by human annotators, which are some sort of span within the context. And there's also the prediction, which is the prediction produced by the leading model within the squad competition. And this is very much what we're trying to get at with engaging experts and then being able to leverage prior research and technology related to this type of approach. So now I'm going to go on to demo the application here. Okay, so we have this this application mocked up. My mouse is gone. Give me a moment. I have to do it without the mouse, I guess, for now. So sign in, and the first task that I'm given, I still can't see my mouse, so I'm just gonna have to rough this out. All right, so the first task that we're provided here is to pick one of the topics. We're asking our experts to choose something that they're interested in or knowledgeable about. I'll go ahead and choose transmission, incubation, and environmental stability. Now, if you refer back to the chart where it was going from topics to questions to answers to feedback, here's where we provide an opportunity for experts to help us probe that search space by producing different question variations for us. So I can put whatever I want here as a question. It goes in, it gets added to the list. You can see in a previous, there's my mouse. You can see in a previous session, I added the question, what is the difference in incubation period between COVID and SARS? And you can imagine over many users engaging with this, we would get many different question variations which are related to these topics. And they're coming from experts who are going to be generating questions that are hopefully similar to things they're interested in and things that other experts would want to know. So I'll get rid of that one for now. I'll continue to the next step, which is evaluating answers. So a query has been selected. One of the topic queries has been selected for me. It's what's the incubation period of COVID-19? I'm given a potential answer, which has been generated by a service in the back end. And my first task as an expert is to assign a grade. There's 2 passing grades and 2 failing grades. And I'm going to assign this a D because while it doesn't answer the question, it does mention the incubation period, so it's not a total failure. My next task is to highlight the section of text which is related, which justifies the grade that I gave. So I'm going to highlight this right here. Boom. And then next, I'm asked to assign the credibility. So if I go and take a look at this actual document, I can see that there's a lot of authors which are not affiliated with any sort of institution that I know. That's what the undefined text there is telling me. And as I breeze through this publication, I can see it's also very short. This is probably not a full text document that's coming from the corpus. If we look at another document from the corpus, just for comparison, you can see this is what a full text publication looks like, right? There's much more information for us to go on. You'd imagine that assuming the text answer that's provided is relevant, this would be a much more credible answer. So based on that, I'm going to assign this questionable credibility, and then here I'd be able to submit this grade. I would be offered a new question related to this query, or a new query and a new set of questions, and I would iteratively go through this, much like an infinite scroll type user experience that you might find when using LinkedIn and you have people recommendations or scrolling through Pinterest. The idea would be that you just be able to keep going in this very simple workflow. You can go back at any time and choose a different topic if you'd like, but you just keep going, and at some point, if the answers get too poor, if I assign too many failing grades, it will move on to something else, so that I'm not so to make sure that we're sort of pointing the experts into sort of veins of technology where we seem to be getting traction. Skip through these. I have these just for backup in case the demo didn't work. But now that we're here, the last bit I want to tell you about today is how this is not just, the reason why we're calling it an engagement model and talking about that reinforcing feedback loop is more than just a nice front end for experts. It's also a scalable services-based architecture in the back end. And the way that this works is that we have a QA service API, which is how the front-end client knows how to use these different services, and it's very simple. The client sends a piece of data that includes just the topic and the query, and the service returns back a list of answers. The idea here essentially is that you have a very simple and consistent interface between the UI and the backend services that can be applied to any sort of service. We still get the data we want in the format that we want. The next bit of this is the round robin services utilization. So The idea here is that the client, because all these services operate, interact with the client using this API that we just introduced prior, they know how to utilize many different services, and they can do a service discovery to find out what are available to utilize to generate answers. And each of these services can be introduced by different teams working in parallel, either on the same task or in different tasks. And you can imagine we have sort of a random strategy where the application is just generating things for the experts to evaluate across all the services, across all the queries, across all the topics. The essential point here being that you have a scalable means of evaluating new services in parallel. So you can update services individually, you can introduce new services individually, and we don't concern the user with any of this, right? They just continue to use the same workflow. They're presented with new answers. They're asked to use the same evaluation, and that's the gist of it. So with that, I will hand it off to Dawn.
So as mentioned by Luna and Connor, not having labeled data is a major challenge in this project. So we decided to look at some existing biomedical data sets that contain labeled data and somehow leverage those in our experiments. There are some publicly available biomedical data sets, and PubMed Q&A is one of them, which is basically a novel biomedical question answering data set collected from PubMed abstracts. And the task of PubMed Q&A is to answer research questions with yes, no, maybe using the corresponding abstracts. On the right, you can see one sample from this data set, which has a question. For example, here it's, do preoperative statins reduce atrial fibrillation after coronary artery bypass grafting? And this question could be either the title of a research article, or it could be constructed from one. And then there's the context, which is basically the abstract of that paper, excluding the conclusion. And the conclusion is used to represent the long answer for that question. And finally, we have the answer, which is going to be yes, no, or maybe. And in this data set, there's 1K samples that have been annotated by experts. And there's 61K unlabeled Q&A pairs and a little bit over 200K artificially generated Q&A pair samples. Another set of biomedical data set is BioAsk, which is an EU-funded support action to set up a challenge on biomedical semantic indexing and question answering. On the right, again, you can see a sample from this data set where there's a question, and then the ideal answer has been constructed by domain experts. And there's about 3K labeled Q&A instances in this data set. A third data set that we actually crafted ourselves is related to COVID-19, and we crawled reliable medical websites to collect different Q&A pairs. These are going to be general questions about COVID-19. For example, what is a coronavirus? What is COVID-19? What are the symptoms of COVID-19? And so far, we have collected 300 labeled Q&A instances in this data set. As mentioned by Luna and Connor, one of the goals of this project is to obtain gold data for the larger community so that everyone can benefit from that. We'd also like to go through this process intelligently, since consulting subject matter experts is a very costly and time-consuming task. So we propose leveraging some active learning techniques that will help us minimize these costs. To explain what we mean by an active learning approach, consider this very simple example in which we have two different classes which are linearly separable. Now, let's say our experts can only give us labels for 6 samples in total. If we choose the samples highlighted here, we'll most likely end up with the decision boundary showed by the black dotted line, which is not the right decision boundary. However, if we choose this subset of samples, the 6 samples, we'll most likely end up with the solid line, which is the right decision boundary. So if we choose the samples to be annotated in an intelligent way, we can significantly reduce the amount of required labeled data points to design an accurate classifier. Now let's look at this active learner in action. We start with the pool of unlabeled Q&A pairs, which are generated by our framework. And at the very first step, we pick a small subset of these Q&A pairs randomly, and we call them seed data. and then we send them to our human experts for annotation. Then, using this small labeled data set, we train a classifier and classify all of the remaining unlabeled Q&A pairs. Next step is to send these classified Q&A pairs to our active learning block in order to get a batch of samples to be annotated that will be most informative for the classifier to increase its performance. And we keep going through this loop over and over again until we either exhaust our annotation budget or we have labeled all of the Q&A pairs. In order to show that this strategy is going to be useful for our case, we follow a similar strategy using other data sets that are already annotated. So we create this data set that consists of two types of samples. One, valid Q&A pairs, where the answer is going to be the right answer to the question. And the second is going to be the invalid Q&A pairs, in which the answer is obviously not going to answer the question. For the valid Q&A pairs, we're going to leverage both of the medical data sets that I introduced earlier. First one is going to be 1K questions from the PubMed Q&A data set, and we consider the long answers that have been provided by human experts as the answer to those questions. And we also consider the questions in the BioAsk version 7b data set, which has about 3K questions, and we consider the ideal answer for the right answer to those questions. On the other hand, for the invalid Q&A pairs, we're going to consider the questions from the two biomedical data sets, which is going to amount to 4K questions. But for the answers, we're going to randomly pick some text snippets from the COVID-19 data set to assign some answers to these questions, which are most probably going to be wrong answers to these questions. So after generating this data set, we'd also like to consider two different active learning strategies and implement them in our loop. The first strategy is an uncertainty-based method, which selects the samples for which the classifier is the least confident about their labels. And the second strategy is devised to promote some sort of sample diversity by clustering the data points into different clusters and then use their centers to be annotated. And we also compare the performance of these two approaches with a baseline model, which is gonna, yep.
I don't think your slides are advancing.
Am I on slide 36?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, sorry, this is gonna be over soon. Yeah, thank you.
Make sure. Yes.
Good, thanks. Yeah, so yeah, we're just also comparing these two results with a random strategy, which is going to randomly select data points to be annotated. So now that we have the data set and the active learner in place, we just need to pick a binary classifier, which so far we have chosen to be a random forest method. But as we're working on this project, we plan to replace this binary classifier with a BERT-based model, which is going to be more similar to what we're using for generating those Q&A pairs in our current framework. And as you can see in the performance plots, the uncertainty-based active learner is consistently outperforming the random strategy and very soon reaches an accuracy which is really close to the accuracy that's achievable using the whole data set, although it's losing a lot less samples. On the other hand, the random strategy has a better performance compared to the clustering-based strategy after a few steps. However, the clustering strategy is doing a better job at the very beginning of this loop. So to conclude these experiments, we've shown that using an active learning strategy can be really helpful for our situation as well when annotation budget is very limited and very hard to find. So we can find a strategy when obtaining the gold data using our app. Now I want to hand it back over to Luna to talk more about the experiments and various models that we have been working on so far.
Thank you, Dawn. I'm going to reshare my screen and let me know if you can see it.
Yes, we can.
Awesome, thank you. So thanks, Don. And so far, we have talked about the strategies and the application we developed to create the QA pairs from the COVID-19 dataset. Once these expert and annotated QA pairs are obtained, we hope it can benefit a larger research community. But for now, before we get those annotated QA pairs, we still want to make good use of the existing biomedical QA datasets, as Don introduced earlier, like PubMed and BioAsk, to build models and compare their performance. So for the PubMed dataset, if you remember the example Don has shown before, given a question and those questions are in the format or the type of yes or no questions. So they usually start with do, does, is, are. And given the context and the conclusion of this related to this question, the domain experts will answer this question by labeling it yes, no, or maybe. So we formulated the problem as a classification problem, and we implemented 4 models that tries to predict yes, no, or maybe answers for those type of question. So the models we experimented includes the sequence-to-sequence model with 3-layer GRU encoder and decoder, where the encoder takes in the question as a sequence of words. The decoder outputs a sequence with length 1, which will be yes, no, or maybe. So we basically convert the sequence-to-sequence model as a classifier. The second approach we tried has the same architecture, but we use the similar seq-to-sequence architecture, but we use the convolution layer and the attention layer. But the input and the output are the same as the first one. We also tried the nowadays most popular transformer-based models such as BERT, which was first pre-trained on a large corpus of text and fine-tuned on a set of downstream tasks such as entity extraction or finding spans of answers from a paragraph, like in the squat format. And we also implemented and tried the BioBERT model, which has the same architecture as BERT, but it was pre-trained and fine-tuned on the biomedical datasets like PubMed and BioSQ. So for all the above-mentioned models, we trained them on the PubMed artificially generated QA pairs, which includes around 200 QA pairs, and tested them on the expert annotated QA pairs from PubMed. And the scores reported here in this table are from the test results test dataset. So as you can see, the BioBERT achieves the best score, which is not surprising based on the fact that it was pre-trained and fine-tuned on biomedical context already, so it should have a better understanding of the use of biomedical language. And then we also look at the BioSQ dataset, and we find in this dataset there are factoid type questions where the end user would want to retrieve spans of text from a paragraph that answers the question. So this format aligns with the squat format as Connor showed before. So we think we can also try to build models that can retrieve answers for this type of question. So so for those type of questions, we formulate the model as an entity extraction model. So we want to do classification on the token level. And we used the Albert model, which is a light version of BERT model, and it has the state-of-art result on the squat dataset. So we trained the model on the BioSQ training dataset with those factoid type of questions, and tested the model on the BioSQ testing dataset and the squat dataset. And we're able to achieve 34% strict accuracy and 57% lenient accuracy, which is basically the top 5 accuracy. So we hope the results we obtained from those models can be used as a reference once we obtain the QA pairs from the COVID-19 dataset and start building the models for that dataset. So that's the work we've been focusing for the past few weeks, which we hope that can help the medical community in the fight against the COVID-19. So now we're happy to take any questions. Thank you.